Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is let yourself be seen. Isla Whitaker had built a life on her own terms, independent, composed, untouchable. But when a single glance across a crowded boardroom shatters her carefully controlled world, she faces a choice she never saw coming: stay safe in the life she knows, or risk everything for a man whose power could either elevate her or destroy her reputation. Garrett Walker, CEO, untouchable, impossibly closed off, wasn't supposed to notice her, and she definitely wasn't supposed to feel this. What begins as stolen glances evolves into something neither of them can ignore, forcing them both to decide: can love built in secret survive the light of day? Before we dive in, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love connecting with you. And if you're enjoying these stories, please subscribe. Your support truly means the world to this channel. Now let's begin. Isla Whitaker had never been the kind of woman who waited for life to happen to her. At 29, she had built something steady in Fort Greene, a neighborhood that felt like breathing room in a city that never stopped moving. Her apartment had tall windows that framed the morning light perfectly, hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places, and a small balcony where she drank her coffee before the world woke up. She worked as an administrative assistant at a corporate consulting firm, a role that required precision and composure, both of which came naturally to her. Isla didn't need to announce herself. She simply existed, gracefully, intelligently, with a quiet confidence that people either noticed immediately or missed entirely. Her beauty was the kind that revealed itself slowly. The curve of her smile, the way her dark eyes held yours a second longer than expected, the deliberate way she moved through space as if she owned every inch of it without needing to claim it aloud. She liked her life. She liked the rhythm of it. The early walk to the corner cafe where the barista knew her order, the subway ride with her headphones in, the way she could disappear into her work and reappear at the end of the day without anyone asking too much of her. But that Tuesday in late September, something shifted. The assignment came through email: temporary support for a series of high-level meetings at a corporate office in Lower Manhattan. Isla read it twice, replied with a professional confirmation, and didn't think much of it. She'd done this kind of work before, coordinating schedules, organizing documents, making sure everything ran smoothly while staying invisible. The building was sleek and modern, all glass and steel, the kind of place where even the elevator buttons felt expensive. Isla arrived early, as she always did, and was directed to a conference room on the 32nd floor. The view stretched across the city, and for a moment she let herself take it in. The way the light broke against the skyline, the endless movement below. "Ms. Whitaker?" She turned. A woman in her 40s stood in the doorway, tablet in hand, expression efficient but not unkind. "I'm Laura, Mr. Walker's executive assistant. He'll be in shortly. In the meantime, here's the agenda for today's meetings. If you could ensure the folders are arranged by participant and double-check the AV setup, that would be perfect." Isla nodded, already moving. She worked quickly, methodically, her hands steady as she aligned documents and adjusted the screen settings. She was halfway through when she felt it: a presence. Not intrusive, not loud, just there. She looked up. Garrett Walker stood near the entrance, one hand loosely holding his phone, his gaze fixed directly on her. He didn't look away. Isla held his stare, her pulse steady, her expression calm. She wasn't the type to flinch under observation, and she certainly wasn't going to start now. If anything, there was something almost amusing about it, the way he seemed caught, as if he hadn't expected her to meet his eyes so directly. He was exactly what she'd imagined a CEO would look like: sharp suit, clean lines, the kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew. But there was something else, too, something quieter beneath the surface. A tension in the way he stood, as if he was used to being in control, but wasn't entirely comfortable with it. "Mr. Walker," Laura said, stepping into the room and breaking the moment. "Everything's ready whenever you are." Garrett's gaze lingered on Isla for one more second before he nodded. "Thank you." His voice was low, measured, the kind that didn't need to be raised to command attention. Isla returned to her task, but she felt the shift in the air. She felt the way his attention hadn't fully left her, even as he moved to the head of the table and opened his laptop. The meetings began. Isla had always been good at reading rooms. It was a skill she'd honed over years of working in spaces where power dynamics shifted with every word, every glance. She watched the way Garrett spoke, direct, thoughtful, never wasting a sentence. He listened more than he talked, and when he did speak, people leaned in. But what caught her attention wasn't his authority. It was the way he kept looking at her, not obviously, not inappropriately, just consistently. When she handed him a document, their fingers didn't touch, but the space between them felt charged. When she adjusted the presentation screen, she felt his gaze follow her across the room. When she sat quietly in the corner taking notes for Laura, she caught him glancing her way between speakers. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else entirely. By the time the first meeting ended, Isla had made a decision. She wasn't going to pretend she hadn't noticed. The break came an hour later. Most of the executives filtered out toward the elevators, heading to lunch or phone calls. Isla stayed behind, tidying up the table, stacking folders with practiced efficiency. "You're very good at that." She turned. Garrett stood near the window, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable but not cold. Isla smiled slightly. "At organizing papers? I'd hope so. It's literally my job." A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "I meant the way you move through a room, like you already know where everything should be." "Maybe I do." He tilted his head, studying her. "You don't seem nervous." "Should I be? Most people are. In rooms like this." Isla set down the last folder and met his gaze fully. "I'm not most people." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet that held weight, where neither person felt the need to fill the space with unnecessary words. Garrett's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but close. "No, you're not." Before Isla could respond, Laura appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Walker, your 2 o'clock is here." He nodded, his eyes still on Isla. "Thank you." As he walked past her toward the door, he paused. "I hope you'll be here tomorrow." It wasn't a question, but it wasn't a command either. Isla turned slightly, just enough to catch his profile. "I will be." He left without another word. That evening, Isla walked home through Fort Greene as the sun dipped low behind the brownstones. She stopped at her usual bodega, picked up fresh flowers and a bottle of wine, and climbed the stairs to her apartment with the kind of ease that came from ritual. But as she stood on her balcony later, glass in hand watching the city settle into dusk, she couldn't stop thinking about the way Garrett Walker had looked at her, not like she was something to be figured out, but like she was something worth paying attention to. And Isla Whitaker, who had spent years being perfectly content in her own space, realized with a strange sort of clarity that she hadn't minded it at all. She took a slow sip of wine, her lips curving into a small, private smile. Tomorrow would be interesting. The second day began the same way the first had ended, with Isla unable to stop thinking about Garrett Walker. She woke before her alarm, which almost never happened. The morning light filtered through her bedroom curtains in soft gold streaks, and for a moment, she just lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the quiet intensity of yesterday's exchange, the way he'd looked at her, the way he'd paused before leaving, the way her own pulse had quickened without permission. Isla wasn't used to being caught off guard. She pushed herself out of bed, pulled on her running clothes, and headed out into the cool Brooklyn morning. The streets were still quiet, the kind of peaceful that only existed before the city fully woke up. She ran her usual route through Fort Greene Park, her breath steady, her mind clearer with every stride. By the time she returned home, showered and dressed in a fitted black blouse and tailored gray slacks, she felt like herself again, composed, centered, ready. But as she stood in front of her mirror, fastening simple silver earrings, she caught her own reflection and paused. She looked the same as always, professional, put together, calm, but there was something different in her eyes, a flicker of anticipation she couldn't quite dismiss. Isla tilted her head slightly, studying herself. "Interesting," she murmured to her reflection, echoing her own thought from the night before. Then she grabbed her bag and headed out the door. The office building felt different this time. Maybe it was the familiarity of returning to the same space. Maybe it was the way the security guard nodded at her in recognition. Or maybe it was the fact that, as soon as she stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 32nd floor, her heartbeat shifted into something faster, something warmer. Isla didn't fight it. She simply acknowledged it and moved forward. When the elevator doors opened, Laura was already waiting near the conference room, tablet in hand, looking as efficiently pleasant as ever. "Good morning, Ms. Whitaker. Same setup as yesterday. 3 meetings back-to-back starting at 9:30. Mr. Walker will be in shortly." Isla nodded. Understood. She moved into the conference room and began her work, arranging materials with the same precision as before. But this time she was aware of every sound, the soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant murmur of voices in the hallway, the quiet click of her own heels against the polished floor. And then, she heard it. Footsteps. Deliberate. Unhurried. She didn't turn around immediately. Instead, she finished adjusting the last document, took a slow breath, and only then looked up. Garrett stood in the doorway, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been made for his exact frame. His tie was a deep navy, his expression calm but attentive, and his eyes, those steady, unreadable eyes, were already on her. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and even. Isla met his gaze without hesitation. "Good morning, Mr. Walker." He stepped into the room, closing the distance between them in a way that felt intentional but not invasive. He stopped a few feet away, his hands sliding into his pockets, his posture relaxed but alert. "You came back." Isla tilted her head slightly, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. "I said I would. People say a lot of things. I'm not people." The echo of her own words from yesterday hung in the air between them, and she saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes, the faint curve of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile, but something close. "No," he said quietly. "You're not." The silence that followed was different from yesterday's. It wasn't charged with uncertainty. It was charged with awareness, the kind that made the air feel heavier, the space between them feel smaller. Isla didn't look away. She held his gaze, her pulse steady, her confidence intact. She wasn't intimidated by him. If anything, she was intrigued by the way he seemed both in control and slightly off balance at the same time. Before either of them could speak again, the sound of voices in the hallway broke the moment. The first meeting was about to begin. Garrett straightened slightly, his professional mask sliding back into place. But just before he turned toward the door, he said something that made Isla's chest tighten in a way she wasn't expecting. "I'm glad you're here." It wasn't casual. It wasn't polite. It was honest. And then he was gone, moving to the head of the table as the executives began filing in. The meetings unfolded the same way they had the day before. Strategic discussions, data presentations, decisions made with surgical precision. Isla took notes, handed out materials, adjusted the screen when needed, and stayed quietly efficient in the background. But she felt him. Every time she moved, she felt Garrett's attention follow her. Not obviously, not in a way that anyone else would notice. But she noticed. She felt the weight of his gaze when she stood to refill water glasses. She felt the shift in his posture when she passed behind his chair. She felt the way his voice seemed to soften just slightly when he addressed her directly. "Ms. Whitaker, could you pull up the logistics report?" Of course. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in that brief exchange, something unspoken passed between them, something that had nothing to do with logistics reports or professional courtesy. It was the kind of tension that hummed beneath the surface, invisible to everyone else but undeniable to the two people who felt it. The break came just after noon. Most of the executives dispersed quickly, heading to lunch meetings or phone calls. Isla stayed behind, as she always did, tidying up the materials and resetting the room for the next session. She was alone for maybe 3 minutes before Garrett walked back in. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood near the window, looking out at the city, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slightly less rigid than they'd been during the meetings. Isla continued her work not because she was ignoring him, but because she knew he would speak when he was ready. And he did. "Do you always stay this composed?" Isla glanced up, her hands pausing over a stack of folders. "Is that a compliment or a concern?" "An observation." She straightened, turning to face him fully. "I don't see the point in being anything else." Garrett's gaze moved from the window to her, and for a moment he just looked at her. Not like he was trying to figure her out, but like he was letting himself actually see her. "Most people get nervous around me," he said quietly. "They second-guess themselves, they try too hard. And you think I should?" "No." His voice dropped lower. "That's the problem." Isla's pulse quickened, but her expression didn't change. She took a slow step closer, not enough to invade his space, but enough to shift the dynamic. "What problem is that exactly?" Garrett exhaled softly, his jaw tightening just slightly. "The one where I can't stop noticing you." The honesty of it landed like a physical touch. Isla didn't flinch, didn't blush, didn't pretend she hadn't felt the same pull. Instead, she held his gaze and said with perfect calm, "Then stop trying to." The words hung in the air between them, charged and deliberate. Garrett's eyes darkened just slightly, and for a moment Isla thought he might close the distance between them, thought he might reach for her, thought the invisible line they'd been dancing around might finally break. But he didn't move. He just stood there, his breathing a little deeper, his control intact but visibly strained. "You don't make this easy," he said, his voice rough around the edges. Isla's lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. "Good." Before he could respond, Laura's voice echoed from the hallway. "Mr. Walker, your 130 is here." Garrett didn't look away from Isla. Not immediately. He let the moment stretch just a little longer, as if committing it to memory. Then he nodded once, his voice steady as he called back, "I'll be right there." He turned toward the door but paused just before stepping through. Isla. It was the first time he'd said her name. She looked up, her heart doing something unfamiliar in her chest. "Yes?" He hesitated, then, "Today's your last day on this assignment, isn't it?" "It is," she confirmed, understanding the weight behind the question. "Good." His eyes held hers. "Then have dinner with me. Tonight." It wasn't a question, but it wasn't a demand either. Isla's smile deepened and she tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes gleaming with something playful and warm. "When?" "Tonight." "Where?" "Anywhere you want." She considered him for a long moment, letting the tension build, letting him wait. Then she said softly but clearly, "Pick me up at 7. Garrett's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Something that looked like relief and hunger all at once. "I will." And then he was gone. That evening, Isla stood in front of her closet, staring at the rows of clothes with a focus she usually reserved for work. She pulled out a deep emerald dress, fitted, elegant, with a neckline that was sophisticated but undeniably striking. She paired it with simple heels and let her hair fall in soft waves over her shoulders. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she didn't see someone trying to impress. She saw someone who knew exactly what she wanted. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, Isla Whitaker was letting herself want something, someone, without apology. She glanced at the clock. 6:58. Her phone buzzed. "I'm here." Isla smiled, grabbed her coat and walked out the door. Whatever was about to happen, she was ready. Garrett's car was understated but unmistakably expensive, a sleek black sedan that fit him perfectly. When Isla stepped out of her building, he was already standing beside it, one hand resting on the open passenger door, his eyes fixed on her. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked. Isla descended the brownstone steps slowly, her emerald dress catching the glow of the streetlights, her confidence radiating with every step. She watched the way his expression shifted, subtle, but there, the slight parting of his lips, the way his shoulders straightened, the flicker of something unguarded in his eyes before he locked it back down. "You're staring," she said as she reached him, her voice warm with amusement. "I know." He didn't apologize, didn't look away. Isla smiled, something soft and knowing, and slid into the passenger seat. Garrett closed the door carefully as if the moment required precision, then walked around to the driver's side. The interior smelled faintly of leather and something clean, understated. The silence between them as he pulled into traffic wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, alive with everything they hadn't yet said aloud. "Where are we going?" Isla asked, watching the city lights blur past her window. "A place in Tribeca, small, quiet, good food." He glanced at her briefly. "Unless you'd prefer somewhere else. Tribeca's fine. You trust me?" Isla turned to look at him fully, her dark eyes steady. "Should I?" Garrett's hands tightened slightly on the wheel, his jaw flexing. "Yes." "Then I do?" The simplicity of her answer seemed to affect him more than anything else she could have said. He exhaled slowly, his gaze returning to the road, and Isla noticed the way his thumb traced an absent circle against the steering wheel. A small tell, a crack in the composure. She liked that she could make him nervous. The restaurant was exactly as he described, tucked away on a quiet street, intimate without being overly romantic, elegant without pretension, soft lighting, exposed brick, tables spaced far enough apart that conversations felt private. The hostess recognized Garrett immediately, greeting him with polite familiarity before leading them to a corner table near the window. Isla noticed the way people glanced at him as they passed, not with intrusion, but with recognition. He was someone. She'd known that, but seeing it in action was different. Garrett pulled out her chair before she could reach for it herself. "Thank you," Isla said, settling into the seat with easy grace. He sat across from her, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. The noise of the restaurant faded into background hum. The world narrowed to the space between them. "Have you been here before?" Isla asked, her fingers tracing the edge of the menu. A few times. Business dinners mostly. And tonight? Garrett's gaze held hers. Tonight's not business. No, Isla agreed softly. It's not. The waiter appeared, offering wine suggestions with practiced ease. Garrett deferred to Isla, and she chose a Malbec without hesitation. When the waiter left, Garrett leaned back slightly, studying her with that same quiet intensity she was beginning to recognize. "You're not what I expected," he said. Isla tilted her head. "What did you expect? Someone easier to read? Disappointing?" "No." His voice dropped lower. "The opposite." The wine arrived and they ordered. Grilled salmon for her, steak for him. But the food felt secondary to everything else happening at the table. Isla took a slow sip of wine, letting the warmth settle in her chest before she spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. Why did you invite me here?" Garrett didn't answer immediately. He turned his glass slowly between his fingers, his expression thoughtful, almost careful. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about you," he said finally. "And I'm not used to that. Not used to thinking about someone, not used to wanting to." The honesty landed between them like something tangible. Isla felt the shift in her own chest, the quiet pull, the recognition of something real. "And now?" she asked. Garrett's eyes met hers, unflinching. "Now I'm wondering what the hell I'm supposed to do about it." Isla set down her glass, her gaze steady. "You could start by not overthinking it. That's not really my style. I noticed." So she leaned forward slightly, just enough to close the space between them by inches. "But maybe that's your problem." Garrett's breath caught, just barely, but she heard it, saw it in the way his chest rose and fell a fraction slower. "You're dangerous," he murmured. Isla's lips curved. "You say that like it's a bad thing. It's not. That's the problem." The food arrived, breaking the tension just enough to let them breathe. They ate slowly, the conversation shifting into easier territory. Stories about the city, places they'd lived, small details that painted the edges of their lives. Isla told him about growing up with an overprotective older sister, about her love for early morning runs and terrible reality TV. Garrett admitted he couldn't cook to save his life, that he'd read the same book 3 times because he couldn't find anything better, that he hated small talk, but couldn't seem to stop talking to her. It was easy, natural, the kind of conversation that felt like discovery rather than performance, but beneath it all the pull remained, the awareness, the way their eyes lingered a second too long, the way the air seemed to shift whenever one of them leaned closer. By the time dessert arrived, a shared chocolate tart that neither of them had particularly wanted but ordered anyway, the restaurant had quieted. Most of the tables were empty now, the night settling into something slower, softer. Isla took a small bite, savoring the richness, and when she looked up, Garrett was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. "What?" she asked, her voice laced with humor. "I'm trying to figure out if this is real." "If what's real?" "This. You." He gestured vaguely between them. "The fact that I'm sitting here with someone I met 2 days ago and feeling like I've known you longer." Isla set down her fork, her heart doing something unfamiliar and warm. "It's real." "How do you know?" "Because I feel it too." The simplicity of her admission seemed to undo something in him. His hand moved across the table, not all the way, but enough. His fingers rested near hers, close but not touching, the space between them electric. Isla looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. And then, slowly, deliberately, she closed the distance. Her fingers brushed against his. Light, testing, a question without words. Garrett's hand turned, his palm opening, and their fingers slid together like they'd been meant to fit that way all along. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The touch said everything. They left the restaurant near midnight, the city quieter now, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights and distant sirens. Garrett's hand stayed loosely linked with hers as they walked toward the car, and Isla felt the warmth of it spread through her entire body. When they reached the car, he didn't open the door immediately. Instead, he turned to face her, his back against the vehicle, his expression serious but soft. "I don't want tonight to end," he said quietly. Isla stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, close enough that their breath mixed in the cool night air. "Then don't let it." Garrett's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "Isla, don't overthink it," she whispered, echoing her earlier words. His hand came up slowly, his fingers brushing against her jaw, tracing the line of her cheek with a gentleness that made her chest tighten. She could feel the restraint in him, the war between what he wanted and what he thought he should do. Isla didn't move, didn't push. She just waited, her heart steady, her gaze unwavering. And then, finally, Garrett leaned in. Their foreheads touched first. A pause, a breath, a moment suspended in time. When their lips finally met, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was slow, deliberate, achingly tender. His hand slid into her hair, and hers pressed against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palm. The kiss deepened and the world around them disappeared. There was no city, no noise, no past or future, just the two of them, standing in the middle of a quiet Tribeca street, holding on to something that felt impossibly fragile and impossibly strong all at once. When they finally pulled apart, neither of them spoke immediately. Garrett's thumb traced her bottom lip, his breathing uneven, his eyes dark and full of something Isla couldn't name but felt in every cell of her body. "Come home with me," he said, his voice rough. Isla's pulse quickened, but her gaze didn't waver. "Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything." She studied him for a long moment, the honesty in his eyes, the vulnerability he was letting her see, the way he was giving her the choice without pressure, without expectation. And then she nodded. Okay. The drive to his place in the Upper West Side was quiet, but not tense. Their hands stayed linked across the console, and every so often Garrett would glance at her, as if reassuring himself she was still there, still real. When they arrived, he led her through a sleek lobby and into an elevator that opened directly into his apartment, a spacious, minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Isla walked to the window, taking in the view, the lights stretching endlessly in every direction. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Garrett came up behind her, close but not touching. "It's always felt empty." She turned to face him, and in the dim light of the apartment she saw everything he wasn't saying aloud. "Not anymore," she whispered. And when he kissed her again, it was with a certainty that neither of them had felt in a long time. The night carried the rest. Isla woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment she lay still, her mind catching up to her surroundings. The expansive bedroom, the crisp white sheets, the faint scent of cedar, and something distinctly masculine. Then she felt the warmth beside her, the steady rise and fall of breathing, and everything from the night before came rushing back. She turned her head slowly. Garrett was still asleep. His face softened in a way she hadn't seen before. The sharp edges of his usual composure were gone, replaced by something quieter, more vulnerable. His dark hair was tousled, one arm draped loosely across his stomach, the other stretched out toward her side of the bed as if reaching even in sleep. Isla allowed herself a moment just to look at him, to take in the reality of where she was, what had happened, and how completely right it felt. No regret, no second guessing, just clarity. She slipped out of bed carefully, pulling on his discarded dress shirt from the night before. It hung loose on her frame, the sleeves falling past her wrists, and she rolled them up as she padded barefoot across the cool hardwood floors toward the wall of windows. The city stretched out below her, bathed in the soft gold of early morning. It was barely 7, and the world felt suspended, quiet, peaceful, full of possibility. "You're awake." Isla turned. Garrett stood in the doorway, wearing only black boxer briefs, his hair still messy, his eyes heavy with sleep but alert. He looked at her the way he had last night, like she was something he couldn't quite believe was real. "I didn't want to wake you," she said softly. "I wasn't really sleeping." He crossed the room slowly, stopping just behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "I kept thinking you might disappear." Isla turned to face him, her back against the window, her eyes searching his. "I'm still here. I see that." His gaze dropped to the shirt she was wearing, and his lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile but close. "That looks better on you than it ever did on me. I'll return it." "Don't." The word hung between them, simple but weighted with meaning. Garrett's hand came up slowly, his fingers brushing a strand of hair away from her face, his touch lingering against her cheek. "Last night was perfect," Isla finished, her voice steady. He exhaled, something like relief washing over his features. "I was going to say life-changing, but perfect works too." Isla's chest tightened in the best way. She reached up, her hand covering his where it rested against her face. "I don't regret it, Garrett, not for a second." "Good." His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "Because I don't either." They stood like that for a long moment, the morning light wrapping around them, the city waking up below. Then Garrett leaned down and kissed her. Slow, unhurried, full of everything they hadn't said yet but both already felt. When they pulled apart, Isla smiled. "Do you have coffee in this place, or is your kitchen just for show?" Garrett laughed. A genuine, unguarded sound that made Isla's heart do something ridiculous. "I have coffee. I might even have food." "Might? I don't cook, remember? Then it's a good thing I do." The kitchen was as sleek and modern as the rest of the apartment. Marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, everything precisely organized. Isla found what she needed easily, moving through the space with the kind of confidence that came from being comfortable in her own skin, regardless of location. Garrett sat at the island, watching her crack eggs into a bowl with practiced ease, her movements fluid and sure. "You're good at that," he observed. "At making eggs? At making yourself at home." Isla glanced at him over her shoulder, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "Should I not?" "No, I like it." He paused. "I like you here." The simplicity of the statement made Isla's chest warm. She turned back to the stove, whisking the eggs before pouring them into the pan. "What about work? Don't you usually leave by now?" "I cleared my morning." Isla turned fully, one eyebrow raised. "You did?" "I did." "Because of me?" "Because of you." She studied him for a moment, seeing the truth in his eyes, the deliberate choice, the shift in priorities, the quiet declaration that this mattered more than his usual routine. "That's a first for you, isn't it?" she asked gently. Garrett nodded slowly. "Yeah, it is." Isla plated the eggs, added toast and fresh fruit she'd found in the fridge, and carried both plates to the island. She sat beside him, their knees almost touching, and handed him a fork. "Then I'm honored," she said softly. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that felt natural rather than awkward. Every so often their eyes would meet, and something unspoken would pass between them. Recognition, warmth, the beginning of something neither of them had planned but both were willing to explore. They were finishing their coffee when Garrett's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and Isla saw his expression shift, concern mixed with resignation. "I need to take this," he said quietly. Isla gave him space, moving toward the window while he stepped into the living room. She caught fragments of the conversation. "Yes, I'm aware. Her assignment had concluded. I'll address it directly." When he returned, his jaw was tight, shoulders tense. "Everything okay?" Isla asked. Garrett leaned against the counter. "That was Laura. The board has questions about us, about the timeline of when we met and when things became personal. They're worried about conflict of interest." "Yes." He met her eyes. "I need you to know you were assigned by your firm, not by me. I had no input. And we didn't start anything until after your work there ended." "I know that," Isla said calmly. "So what's the problem?" "The optics. This could affect your professional reputation. Your firm might be questioned." Isla moved closer. "Garrett, I'm not worried. We did nothing wrong. We waited. If they need documentation proving when my assignment ended, we'll provide it. But I'm not going to apologize for what happened after." He stared at her. "You're not scared? Of corporate gossip?" She smiled slightly. "I'm not going to let fear keep me from choosing someone who makes me happy." He pulled her close, holding her tight. "This might get complicated. HR will want to verify everything. Then we'll cooperate," Isla said simply. "We'll be honest, and we'll handle it. Together." "Together," he echoed, tension finally leaving his shoulders. After a moment, he pulled back. "I need to go in for a few hours. Deal with this directly." "I know. But tonight, come back. Stay with me." Isla smiled. "I was planning on it." Later, they moved to the living room. Isla curled up on the couch, still wearing his shirt, and Garrett sat beside her, their legs touching. They talked about lighter things now. Childhood stories, abandoned dreams, moments that had shaped them. "I always thought I'd leave New York eventually," Isla admitted. "Move somewhere quieter, maybe a small town." "Why didn't you?" "Because I realized I wasn't running toward something. I was running away." She looked at him. "And I don't run anymore." Garrett's hand found hers. "What changed?" "I did. I stopped waiting for life to feel safe and started choosing what I actually wanted." "Like last night?" Isla smiled. "Especially like last night." Garrett brought her hand to his lips. "I'm glad you chose this. Chose me. So am I." They fell quiet again, and Isla leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid warmth of him beside her. It was the kind of moment that felt suspended, perfect and fragile and deeply real all at once. "Can I ask you something?" Garrett said after a while. "Always. What are we doing here?" Isla lifted her head. "What do you mean? I don't do this. I don't bring people into my life like this. I don't clear my schedule. I don't—" He paused. "I don't feel like this." "Like what?" "Like I found something I didn't know I was looking for." Isla shifted to face him fully, her hand resting against his chest. "Then stop overthinking it and just let it be what it is." "Which is?" "Something good. Something real. Something worth keeping." Garrett's hand covered hers. "I want that. I want you. But my life is complicated. There are expectations, pressures—" "I'm not asking you to control anything," Isla said gently. "I'm just asking you to be honest with me. I can do that. Then we'll figure out the rest as we go." Garrett pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her, and Isla melted into him, her cheek pressed against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I don't want to lose this," he murmured into her hair. "You won't," she whispered back. "Not if we don't let fear make our decisions." They spent the rest of the morning wrapped up in each other, talking, laughing, sharing quiet kisses that tasted like coffee and promises. Eventually, reality crept back in. Garrett had meetings he couldn't cancel, and Isla had her own life waiting. But before she left, Garrett caught her hand. "Stay tonight," he said. "Come back after work." Isla smiled. "I will. Promise. Promise." He kissed her, long and deep. When they pulled apart, Isla grabbed her dress, slipped into the bathroom to change, and emerged composed as ever. Garrett walked her to the elevator. "I'll see you tonight," he said as the doors opened. "You will." Isla stepped inside, turning to face him as the doors began to close. Their eyes held, and in that final moment before the elevator descended, she saw everything she needed to know reflected back at her. This wasn't just attraction. This wasn't just chemistry. This was the beginning of something that could change everything. And for the first time in her life, Isla Whitaker wasn't afraid of that change. She was ready for it. When Isla stepped out onto the street, the city was fully awake. People rushing past, taxis honking, the familiar chaos of New York. But she felt different, lighter. She pulled out her phone and texted her sister. "I think I met someone." The response came almost immediately. "Tell me everything." Isla smiled, slipping her phone back into her pocket. Not yet. Some things were still too new, too precious to share. But she would. Soon. For now, she just wanted to hold on to the feeling, the warmth, the possibility, the certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. 3 weeks had passed since that first night, and Isla's life had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. She still lived in her Fort Greene apartment, still walked to the same corner cafe each morning, still took the subway to work. But now there were texts that made her smile during her commute, calls that lasted well past midnight, and nights when she didn't sleep in her own bed at all. Garrett had become woven into the fabric of her days, not in a way that consumed her, but in a way that enhanced everything. He was the person she thought about when something funny happened, the voice she wanted to hear at the end of a long day, the presence that made her apartment feel emptier when he wasn't there. And she knew he felt the same. She could see it in the way he looked at her when she walked into a room, in the way he reached for her hand without thinking, in the small adjustments he'd made to his life, leaving work earlier, declining social obligations he didn't care about, creating space for something that mattered more than his meticulously controlled routine. The situation with his board had been resolved quickly and cleanly. HR had conducted their review, confirmed the timeline of events, and concluded there had been no impropriety. Isla's consulting firm had backed up the documentation, and within a week, the whole matter had been quietly closed. But with depth came visibility, and visibility brought its own complications. The first real test came on a Thursday evening. Isla had just finished organizing files for an upcoming presentation when her phone buzzed. A text from Garrett. "Dinner tonight? My place. I'm attempting to cook." She smiled, typing back immediately. "Should I bring a fire extinguisher? Probably. But come anyway." She grabbed her bag and headed out, the autumn air crisp against her skin as she made her way to the subway. By the time she arrived at Garrett's building, the city had settled into its evening rhythm, lights flickering on in windows, the hum of traffic a constant backdrop. When she stepped off the elevator into his apartment, she was greeted by the smell of something surprisingly edible, and the sight of Garrett standing in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly disheveled, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "You're actually cooking," Isla said, setting her bag down and crossing to him. I'm following instructions very carefully, he corrected, pulling her into his arms. There's a difference. She laughed against his chest, breathing him in. That familiar scent of cedar and clean cotton that had become synonymous with comfort. What are we having? Pasta. Simple, hard to mess up, famous last words. He kissed the top of her head, his arms tightening around her. I missed you today. I saw you this morning. I know, still missed you. Isla pulled back just enough to look up at him, her hands resting against his chest. You're getting soft, Walker. Only with you. The honesty in his eyes made her heart squeeze. She rose onto her toes and kissed him, slow and sweet and full of affection that had deepened from attraction into something far more significant. They ate dinner at the kitchen island, talking about their days, laughing at Garrett's earnest attempt at cooking, stealing bites from each other's plates. It was domestic and easy, the kind of moment that felt both ordinary and precious. But as they cleaned up together, Isla sensed something shift in Garrett's demeanor, a tension in his shoulders, a distraction in his eyes. What's wrong? She asked, drying the last plate. Garrett set down the dish he'd been washing, turning to face her fully. There's something I need to talk to you about. Isla's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression calm. Okay. He leaned back against the counter, his arms crossing over his chest. Not defensively, but like he was bracing himself. There's a gala next weekend. It's a big industry event, investors, partners, press. I'm expected to be there. Okay, Isla said again, not seeing the problem yet. I want you to come with me. Understanding dawned. This wasn't just dinner or a quiet night in. This was public, official, a statement. You want me to go as your date? Isla said slowly. Yes. She studied him carefully, seeing the vulnerability beneath the request. And you're worried about what that means. I'm worried about what it might do to you, he admitted. Once we're seen together publicly, people will talk. They'll ask questions. They'll make assumptions. And he paused, his jaw tightening. I don't want that to touch you in a way that makes your life harder. Isla set down the dish towel and moved closer, her hands finding his. Garrett, I'm not fragile. I can handle curiosity. I can handle questions. I know you can. But that doesn't mean I want to subject you to it. Then let me choose. She squeezed his hands. Don't make decisions for me based on what you think I can't handle. Trust me to know what I want. Garrett exhaled slowly, his eyes searching hers. What do you want? I want to go with you, Isla said without hesitation. I want to be there. With you. Publicly. I'm not interested in hiding what we have. Something in his expression softened. Relief mixed with something deeper. Something that looked a lot like gratitude. You're sure? Completely. He pulled her into his arms, his face buried in her hair. I don't deserve you. Isla smiled against his shoulder. Yes, you do. You just don't believe it yet. The week leading up to the gala passed quickly. Isla found herself excited rather than nervous, a feeling that surprised her. She'd never been someone who craved the spotlight, but the idea of standing beside Garrett, of being part of his world in a real and visible way, felt right. She chose a dress, deep navy, elegant with clean lines that made her feel both sophisticated and entirely herself. When she tried it on the night before the event, standing in front of her mirror, she barely recognized the confidence radiating back at her. This wasn't just about a dress or an event. This was about stepping fully into something she'd chosen, something that mattered. Saturday evening arrived with clear skies and a crisp autumn breeze. Garrett picked her up at 6, and when Isla opened her door, she watched his expression transform, eyes widening, lips parting slightly, a look of pure reverence crossing his face. Isla, he breathed. You look. Don't finish that sentence with beautiful, she interrupted playfully. Be more creative. A slow smile spread across his face. You look like someone I'm terrified to lose and impossible not to love. The words landed like a physical touch. Isla's breath caught, her heart doing something wild in her chest. It was the first time either of them had used that word. Love, even indirectly. Garrett, I'm not asking you to say it back, he said quickly. I just needed you to know. Isla crossed the small distance between them, her hands framing his face. I love you too. She felt the exact moment the words registered, the way his breath stopped, the way his eyes darkened with emotion, the way his entire body seemed to lean into her as if she was gravity itself. Say it again, he whispered. I love you. He kissed her then, deep and consuming and full of everything they'd built over the past few weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, the world reduced to just the two of them. "We're going to be late," Isla murmured. "I don't care." "Yes, you do." He laughed softly. "Yeah, I do." The gala was exactly what Isla had expected, elegant, formal, filled with people who moved through the space with practiced ease. But walking in with Garrett's hand resting protectively on her lower back, she felt none of the nervousness she might have anticipated. She felt certain. People noticed them immediately. She could feel the subtle shift in attention, the curious glances, the whispered conversations. But Garrett never left her side, never made her feel like an accessory or an afterthought. He introduced her with genuine pride, included her in conversations naturally, and made it clear through every gesture that she belonged there, not because of him, but in her own right. Isla handled it all with the same quiet confidence she brought to everything else. She was polite but not deferential, engaged but not performing. She was simply herself, and that more than anything seemed to captivate everyone who spoke to her. "You're incredible," Garrett murmured during a quiet moment, his lips near her ear. "I'm just being me." Exactly. Later in the evening, they found themselves on a balcony overlooking the city, the party continuing inside but feeling distant, muted. Garrett pulled her close and they swayed slightly to the music drifting through the open doors. "Thank you for tonight," he said softly. "For what?" "For being here, for not hiding, for choosing this, choosing us, even when it meant stepping into something complicated." Isla looked up at him, her dark eyes steady. "It's not complicated, Garrett. Not the part that matters." "Which part is that?" "The part where I love you. The part where you love me. Everything else is just details." Garrett smiled, a real unguarded smile that transformed his entire face. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple. We're the ones who make it complicated." He leaned down, kissing her softly, his hand cupping her cheek. "I'm done making it complicated." "Good." They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped up in each other, the city sprawling below them, the future stretching out ahead. And Isla knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was it. This was the kind of love that didn't announce itself with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was the kind that built itself slowly, deliberately, in shared mornings and quiet conversations, and the decision to choose each other every single day. When they finally left the gala, well past midnight, Garrett drove them back to his apartment. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. The silence was comfortable, full of everything they'd already said and everything they didn't need to say aloud. Inside his apartment, Isla kicked off her heels and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had brought them together. Garrett came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Move in with me," he said quietly. Isla turned in his arms, surprised. "What? Move in with me? I know it's fast. I know it's a big step, but I don't want to spend another night without you here. I don't want this to be temporary." Isla searched his face, seeing nothing but honesty and hope. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She thought about her apartment in Fort Greene, about the life she'd built there, about the independence she'd fought for, and then she thought about this, about him, about them, about the future they could build together. "Yes," she said softly, "I'll move in with you." Garrett's face broke into the widest smile she'd ever seen. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her once before setting her down and kissing her with a joy that was contagious. When they finally pulled apart, both of them laughing, breathless, Isla knew she'd made the right choice. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. 6 months later, the apartment no longer felt like just Garrett's space. It had become theirs. Isla's books lined the shelves beside his business journals. Her running shoes sat by the door next to his dress shoes. The kitchen, once pristine and barely used, now smelled of fresh coffee every morning and whatever new recipe she was experimenting with on weekends. Small plants dotted the windowsills, bringing life and color to the minimalist aesthetic. Her laughter echoed through rooms that had once been too quiet. It was a home now, not just a place to sleep, but a place to live. On a Sunday morning in early spring, Isla woke to sunlight streaming across the bed and the familiar warmth of Garrett beside her. She turned onto her side, watching him sleep, still amazed by the everyday miracle of waking up next to someone she loved this deeply. As if sensing her gaze, his eyes opened slowly. A smile curved his lips before he was even fully awake. "Morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. Morning. He reached for her, pulling her close, and they lay like that for a while, tangled together, perfectly content, the city waking up around them but their world contained to just this moment. "What do you want to do today?" Garrett asked eventually, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. "Nothing," Isla said with a satisfied sigh. "Absolutely nothing." I like the sound of that. They stayed in bed longer than they should have, talking about inconsequential things. What to have for breakfast, whether they should finally start that show everyone kept recommending, if they needed to buy more plants. Isla's answer, always yes. Garrett's answer, we're running out of windowsills. It was ordinary, domestic, perfect. Eventually they got up. Garrett made coffee while Isla started on pancakes. They moved around each other with the easy familiarity of two people who had learned each other's rhythms, who no longer had to think about where the other would be because they just knew. "I have something for you," Garrett said, as they sat at the island with their breakfast. Isla looked up, curious. "It's not my birthday." "I know, I just saw it and thought of you." He slid a small, wrapped package across the counter. Isla opened it carefully, peeling back the paper to reveal a leather-bound journal, the kind with thick, cream-colored pages and a ribbon bookmark. Her name was embossed on the cover in elegant script. "Garrett," she breathed, running her fingers over the leather. "It's beautiful. You're always talking about wanting to write more. I thought maybe this could be a start." Isla looked up at him, her eyes bright. "Thank you. Really. This is..." She paused, overwhelmed. "Perfect." He leaned across the counter and kissed her softly. "You're welcome." Later, after they'd eaten and cleaned up, they found themselves on the couch, Isla with her new journal open on her lap, pen in hand, and Garrett with a book he'd been trying to finish for weeks. But he wasn't really reading. He kept glancing at her, watching the way her brow furrowed slightly when she was thinking, the way she bit her lower lip when she was searching for the right word. "You're staring," she said without looking up. "I know. Any particular reason?" Garrett set down his book. "I'm just thinking about how different my life is now. How different I am." Isla looked up, her expression softening. "Different how?" "Happier. Lighter." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I used to think success meant control, keeping everything in its place, never letting anything disrupt the plan. And now? Now I know that was just fear dressed up as discipline." He reached for her hand. "You taught me that." "I didn't teach you anything," Isla said gently. "You were ready to change. I just showed up at the right time. You did more than show up." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "You stayed. Even when it wasn't easy. Even when people had opinions. Even when I was still figuring out how to be someone who could do this." Isla set down her journal and shifted closer, her hand cupping his face. "You made it easy to stay." "Did I?" "Yes. Because you never asked me to be anything other than myself. You never tried to change me or fit me into some version of what you thought you needed. You just..." She paused, smiling. "You just loved me, exactly as I am." Garrett pulled her into his lap, his arms wrapping around her securely. "That's because exactly as you are is everything I didn't know I was missing." They stayed like that, wrapped up in each other, the afternoon stretching out ahead of them in a way that felt infinite. That evening, as the sun began to set, they stood on the balcony together, the same balcony where they'd swayed to music on the night of the gala, where so many quiet conversations had happened, where they'd built this life one moment at a time. "Do you remember the first time we stood here?" Garrett asked, his arms around her waist, her back pressed against his chest. "Of course. You told me the apartment always felt empty." "It did. Until you." Isla turned in his arms, looking up at him. "It's not empty anymore." "No," he agreed, his voice soft. "It's full. We're full." She reached up, her fingers threading through his hair. "I love you, Garrett Walker. I love you, Isla Whitaker." He paused, a smile playing at his lips. "Though maybe one day it'll be Isla Walker." Isla's breath caught, her eyes widening slightly. "Are you?" "Not yet," he said quickly, though his eyes were warm with promise. "But someday, if you want it, I want it," she whispered without hesitation. Garrett kissed her then, slow and deep and full of everything they'd built and everything they still had to build. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling, the future stretching out ahead of them bright and certain. "I never thought I'd have this," Garrett admitted quietly. "A real partner. Someone who makes me better. Someone who sees all of me and stays anyway." "You do have it," Isla said, her voice fierce with conviction. "And I'm not going anywhere. Promise?" "Promise." They stood there as the city lights began to flicker on, the sky turning from gold to deep purple, the world settling into evening. And in that moment, Isla understood something fundamental about love, something she'd learned not from books or movies or other people's stories but from living it herself. Love wasn't about losing yourself. It was about finding someone who helped you become more of who you already were. It wasn't about completing each other. It was about choosing each other every day in 1,000 small ways. It wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, being honest, and building something real together, even when it was hard, even when it was uncertain, even when it required more courage than you thought you had. And most importantly, love wasn't something that happened to you. It was something you did, actively, deliberately, with your whole heart. As they headed inside, hand in hand, ready to make dinner together and spend another ordinary, beautiful evening in the life they'd created, Isla felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. This was it. This was the life she'd always wanted but had never quite been able to articulate. Not perfect, not without challenges or questions or moments of doubt, but real, true, worth every risk she'd taken to get here. And as Garrett pulled her into his arms in the kitchen, kissing her forehead and asking what she wanted for dinner, Isla smiled and thought about how far they'd both come. From that first moment in the conference room, two strangers whose eyes met across a crowded space, to this, to home, to love, to permanence, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly, the kind that simply exists, steady and sure and impossible to deny, the kind worth building a life around. The end. A final thought. Adult love doesn't invade. It approaches, it observes, it waits. It grows in the spaces where silence is respected and choice is conscious. Because sometimes crossing a line isn't a mistake. It's the first step toward not living halfway. It's the beginning of something that changes everything. And if you're brave enough to choose it, patient enough to build it, and honest enough to protect it, it becomes the most beautiful thing you'll ever create. What does love mean to you? What risks have you taken for something or someone that mattered? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.